Hello, my name is Hassan Sorrells, and this is the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast shorts. There's no co-host on these shorts episodes. These are now around 2 to 4 minute, sometimes as long as 6 to 10 minute observations, ideas, thoughts, or rants about the literature, philosophy, psychology, and even the theology of leadership. Because listening to me talk about leadership for now around 2 to 4 minutes is still better than reading and trying to understand yet another business book. Even that business book your coworker won't stop raving about because it quote-unquote changed their life, but you can't see any difference in their leadership behavior. So how good could that author be?
Let me employ some of that pragmatism and intentional language choice that I'm often known for employing on this podcast to make a couple of points as we end the year on this podcast and wander into a brand new year. That is the year 2025. Point number one, particularly as it relates to this show, the impact of reading, writing, and thinking, well, I think will become more of a valuable act in 2025 as more and more people begin to outsource more and more of their cognitive load to machine learning programs. We're already beginning to see this happen with 22-year-old Stanford graduates barely able to think of the next word because ChatGPT is so good at thinking of the next word for them. What does that mean for this podcast? Well, a long-form literature and leadership analysis show will become simultaneously less and less accessible to the average podcast listener, and also more and more valuable to those with the cognition, attention, and willingness to care enough to apply the insights from such a show to their lives. The second point that I'd like to make in relation to what we're going to be doing and where we're going to be going in 2025 while looking back at 2024 is that the need to have our show on the air becomes more and more critical as time continues to go by, because there must be a show. Matter of fact, I firmly believe there should be a place for a show in the realm of a Dick Cavett or a Nightline back in the day that appeals to the intellectual listener with content that has habod, to use the Jewish word, has gravitas, has weight. This show will appeal to that intellectual listener, and it means that this podcast is really going to go further and further down the road of reading books you may not have heard of and that are hard. We're actually going to read more harder books next year and making connections between those books and mashing ideas together that aren't obvious, intuitive, or easy to see in a 10-second glance. This leads into our third point about where we're going to go with the show next year and what we have seen at the back end of 2024. In looking at our audience, looking at you, our listener, and looking at the profile of who our listener is and the growth we've experienced in a particular demographic, what has been revealed to us here is that the desire of our audience is to hear more from our guests and even from myself, not only about contemporary issues of the day, of the moment, of the year, but also hearing more about how we are going to collectively continue down the path we started on at the beginning of 2024. That path includes creating a philosophical, moral, and reasonable argument that will begin to undergird the laying of the cornerstone that will serve to support the next stage in American history and even, dare I say, Western civilization, as we collectively close out the fourth turning. What that means at an even deeper level is the books, the guests, and even myself as a host will be challenging you, the listener, to step up and begin genuinely, intentionally, and on purpose, begin the process of leading, building, and creating the future that we all want to live in and that we want our children to lead in. Now, I know some of these points, when we think about this podcast, sound and read as if they are just pie in the sky or fanciful flights of hubris, particularly for a podcast that just barely crossed 10,000 total downloads in the last 3 years. But if our reach fails to exceed our grasp, well, Horatio, then what's the heaven for? I've always believed that a podcast, and in particular this podcast, could be a small part of the movement to save Western civilization. I also, and this is kind of selfish, don't want to have to tell my grandchildren someday that the only contribution I made to the rescuing of civilization at the end of the chaos of the fourth turning was to shovel digital poop on rented land on some social media platform that I don't even own. And quite frankly, I don't think any of you listeners want to say that to any of your grandchildren either. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year from all of us here at the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books Podcast. And well, that's it for me.
Thank you for listening to the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books Podcast today. And now that you've made it this far, you should subscribe to the audio version of this show on all the major podcast players, including Apple iTunes, Spotify, YouTube Music, and everywhere else where podcasts are available. There's also a video version of our podcast on our YouTube channel. Like and subscribe to the video version of this podcast on the Leadership Toolbox channel on YouTube. Just search for Leadership Toolbox and hit the subscribe button there on YouTube. And while you're doing that, leave a 5-star review if you like what we're doing here on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. Just go below the player and hit 5 stars. We need those reviews to grow, and it's the easiest way to help grow this show. And tell all your friends, of course, in leadership. By the way, if you don't like what we're doing here, well, you can always listen to another leadership show. There are several other good ones out there. At least that's what I've heard. All right. Well, that's it for me.